Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Rath Wang. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited the Philippines on March 16th. Let's hear what he had to say about the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty.
The Philippines and stand by our ironclad defense commitments, including under the Mutual Defense Treaty. Article 4 extends to arm attacks on the Filipino Armed Forces, public vessels, aircraft, including those of its Coast Guard, anywhere in the South China Sea.
Joining us today are Chen-shen, National Chengchi University, Professor of Political Science; Raymond Sung, Prospect Foundation Vice President; Peter Boghossian, National Progress Alliance Executive Director. A very warm welcome to all on the show today.
Thank you.
Blinken used the word ironclad to describe the U.S. defense commitment to the Philippines. We've heard this term also when describing the Taiwan-U.S. partnership. Raymond, what exactly does this word mean?
That means that the U.S. has a firm commitment to the defense obligations to aid the Philippines. But in that statement, I will particularly highlight two aspects. It says that the U.S., under the Mutual Defense Treaty 1951 between the United States and the Philippines, it has the treaty obligation to come to the Philippines' aid to deter any armed attack on the Philippine Armed Forces and private vessels, including Coast Guard vessels. That's the first point. And secondly, anywhere in the South China Sea. Where does that come from? It comes from the legality of the Chinese operations in the South China Sea, in the West Philippine Sea. So it, according to the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal on the South China Sea, the Chinese has no valid claim to the waters under the in the South China Sea, so which means that their so-called law enforcement activities by its Coast Guard is invalid, has no legal basis. So it will protect, extends U.S. protection to any Coast Guard vessels of the Philippines anywhere in the in the West Philippine Sea, which means that the exercise of law enforcement for the Philippines by the Philippine Coast Guard is legally valid, but on the contrary, the PLA or the Coast Guard of China is invalid under international law.
So this definition was actually expanded because of recent Chinese behavior.
I think that's the most noteworthy aspects of this round's diplomatic statements.
Professor Yin, you previously described on a previous episode that the U.S. is a reluctant sheriff.
Yeah.
So how likely is the U.S. going to put out support, say, in this case, the Philippines?
Well, I think, if you compare the Mutual Defense Treaty of U.S. with Philippines signed in 1951 and the one with Taiwan earlier, which it was abrogated when we broke diplomatic relations, that one was signed in 55. The difference is U.S. never really considered the offshore island as part of Taiwan's, that if being attacked,
offshore being Kinmen
and Matsu, and it will come to Taiwan assistance. So for a while, that was something that is debatable. But I think in this one here, at least, Blinken is saying, the South China Sea island are part of this Mutual Defense Treaty. But I think the difference is still here. It says if there is an armed attack, okay, well, how does it? What constitutes an armed attack? Is the Coast Guard, a strong enforcement? Is that armed attack? Or, is if there is no one there, happen to be China just took over one of the reef, and then somehow, if there is no direct military conflict, there is no armed attack of either, the army, we call the military forces, or the Navy, the vessel, public vessel, including the Coast Guard, and then the aircraft. If no things didn't happen, I'm not sure about the commitment here. But it is strong. I mean, at least, even if you compare to Taiwan, our so-called the Taiwan Relations Act, people always worry whether Taiwan Relations Act apply to the offshore island or not. But at least, I think for Manila, it should be pleased with this kind of statement that extend all the way to South China Sea.
It's interesting you compared both Taiwan and the Philippines. So what can Taipei expect from Washington?
Well, I think, if U.S. is committed to help Philippines this way, at least we will feel this is something,
So it's
Biden
encouraging in your
administration, at
opinion.
least, we can expect. And then if something happens, we might want to hope that, the offshore island of Taiwan can also be covered as well. If they don't do this one, then we have no, we will not be very optimistic about, defending our offshore island with the U.S. assistance.
So you're saying it's an encouraging sign?
Yeah, it's an encouraging sign.
According to the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. longstanding policy on international waters, which includes both the West Philippine Sea and the Taiwan Strait, is, quote, upholding freedom of navigation as a principle supports unimpeded lawful commerce and the global mobility of U.S. forces. Peter, what does this exactly mean?
Well, I think it means less now than it's ever meant before. I think undergirding Pax Americana is the ability of the American military to project naval might, specifically across all theaters, but specifically with regard to the protection of waterways. And one of the things that you see consistently now, for example, if you look at the Strait of Hormuz, I don't remember the exact statistic. I think it's like 25% of liquid natural gas and around 33% of, or maybe it's the other way around, of oil flows through there. And the Houthis, which the United States government has declared a terrorist organization, which is in the Iranian-backed group. And let's be blunt, these are basically a bunch of cavemen. They're systematically attacking and making navigation through those waterways more difficult. That, as a whole, in the Indo-Pacific theater, that as a whole undermines the ability of America to spread its deterrence. And once that's done, once that's been undermined, then China is incentivized to attack Taiwan or blockade or attack, because those mechanisms, you can look at Pax Americana as a kind of defense mechanism or a prophylactic against attacks, and the Biden administration does nothing. And I think the Strait of Hormuz is a good basic test case because it's so simple, it's so clear cut, and it's so easy to rectify what that problem is.
Some argue that Taiwan and, say, other areas, especially in the case of Ukraine, that the Taiwan matters much more to the U.S. than these other regions, perhaps with Hormuz as well. But how do you see that, given that more than 80% of trade flows through the Taiwan Strait, and Taiwan's a semiconductor powerhouse that the U.S. military and the government and companies throughout the U.S. rely on? Do you think there would be more action here?
Well, I hate to cast gloom and doom on this panel, but I think you're in for an extraordinarily rude awakening if Donald Trump becomes president of the United States. I think that respectfully to what you said, I think that those apply to any administration except the Trump administration. I don't think that he will honor those. I think for him, those are just verbal behaviors. I don't think that he'll honor that.
We'll talk a bit more about Donald Trump in a bit.
Sure.
Let's now hear from Jay Batongbacal, Executive Associate Dean of the University of the Philippines. Batongbacal is the university's director of the Institute for Maritime Affairs, Law of the Sea. We asked him about Secretary Blinken's recent trip to Manila. He met with both President Marcos Jr. and Foreign Minister Manalo. What is the significance of this trip?
So this trip really is a reaffirmation of the close relationship between the two countries and recent efforts to bring them even closer. As you know, during the previous administration, Philippine-US relations experienced a kind of a lull. So this, in a way, is marking the resurgence of those relations. It comes at a very opportune time, given the increasing pressure that the Philippines is experiencing, particularly with respect to the West Philippine Sea, and of course, due to its continuing need as well for economic development.
China blasted the U.S., saying that military cooperation should not support the illegal position of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea, or what it calls the South China Sea. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I'll immediately say that it is China's positioning here that is illegal. That has been clearly established by the South China Sea arbitration and by international law. China is claiming as its territory areas of the sea that rightfully belong to the Philippines. So it actually has no right to call the Philippine positions illegal. Second, um, China has no business telling the Philippines what to do and who to be friends with. We are a sovereign nation, and its constant degradation of the Philippines as acting not of its own accord, no, really flies in the face of reality. The Philippines has been subject to Chinese pressure, so it's only natural for the Philippines to respond. The military developments that we're seeing here are simply, number one, a way of catching up with its own long-standing plans for modernization, and the United States has been a long-standing partner in that, even before these disputes between the Philippines and China really flared up in recent years. And now what we're seeing, number two, is that the Philippines modernization is being accompanied by capability building and capacity building, which it is getting a lot of from the United States. So this again is just a continuation of long-standing ties between the two countries. After all, we have been allies for the longest time here in the region.
Professor Batongbacal mentioned U.S. capabilities and how it's supporting Philippine military modernization. Raymond, given how close Taiwan is to the Philippines, does this make us safer here?
I think one remarkable progress on part of Philippines, the United States, and Japan, because the three countries has now a trilateral cooperation agreement, which will have this summit early April. I think this growing progress and realizing awareness of the inseparability or connectivity of the security of Taiwan with other countries and for the whole Indo-Pacific. So a great sign is expressing the extension of 4 further U.S. bases allowed on the territory of Philippines under the ETCA, and which is very, very in geographical proximity to Taiwan, which emphasizes the importance of Taiwan. But I think one dimension mentioned by Professor Yan is the gray zone activity, which I think is coming across to all nations in this area. When the activity is lower than the level of armed attack, but with some forcing, like what we just said about the water cannon sprayed, or laser beam, military grade laser beam, which will be harmful for the personnel. How do the countries respond to that? I think one interesting injunction in the press conference for the two secretaries is this. One question was exactly about the gray zone activity, and Blinken just reiterated its commitment about U.S. commitment to the defense of Philippines, including the Coast Guard vessels in anywhere of the Coast Guard, which means that it considers the levels, if it constitutes an attack, even though it's lower than armed attack, the obligation of the U.S. will be triggered. That's the first thing. The second thing is what the Philippines Foreign Affairs Secretary mentioned. He mentioned that we are now in an intense diplomatic activities trying to dissuade or try to deter Chinese from committing this gray zone activity. So it's a carrot and sticks. If you resort to these unprofessional, provocative gray zone activities, we will have the reserve the tools to respond forcefully. But nowadays we are not yet there. But if you continue to that, we're considering that.
It's interesting you mentioned carrot and sticks because just last week in a Bloomberg interview, President Marcos Jr. mentioned that we can't just run to Big Brother. Does that also apply to Taiwan, given that countries in the region are beefing up their own national security without the U.S.?
No. Yes. I think this cooperation between the allies of the United States between themselves are critically important, given that the political uncertainties that will be coming at the end of this year, and also on the basis of what the tremendous progress being made by the Biden administration, not only in Indo-Pacific but also in the global in general about alliance building, that the U.S. trying to exact more commitment from its partners and to the security and between themselves to promote the spirit of cooperation and the working together ethics between themselves.
Yeah, I think what happened is if the U.S. is involved in direct military conflict, of course, it will involve the Philippines will have to, because of security obligation, Japan will help, right?
As treaty allies.
Because of as a treaty ally, you have this obligation. But I think the U.S. Senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, I think he asked during one of the hearings in Congress, he asked about this question, saying, you look at Ukraine, right? If the U.S. is asking people to help, even though it's not sending military assistance, direct military presence there, at least the NATO ally are willing to do it. But he felt that if the U.S. is not directly involved, it's just a unilateral attack from China to Taiwan without attacking the U.S. at all. And then he questioned about the commitment of the East Asian or Indo-Pacific ally of the U.S. to be involved, because there is no obligation there. So I think China probably would know all this. It's like whenever they have any kind of military maneuvers against Taiwan, they are sure. I don't think they want to involve, to have direct confrontation with the U.S. because China doesn't have any treaty security, treaty allies. So China is on its own, right? But U.S. has a lot. So I think this is what we need to make sure that when there is a direct conflict, the U.S. has to be on our side, even without their direct conflict with China.
Speaking of the U.S. being on Taiwan's side, apart from military, what's interesting is that Secretary Blinken's first stop in the Philippines was a semiconductor plant. Taiwan is the world's semiconductor powerhouse. What do you say to that? Do you feel that the U.S. is trying to bring Philippines and Taiwan closer?
Well, that's one. If being a professor in Taiwan, I have taught a lot of Filipino students right now because of our Southern policy that recruiting students from Southeast Asia, ASEAN countries. A lot of them are willing to go to the top universities, including Tsinghua University, to learn in the College of Science and Engineering. So these are the people returning to the Philippines. Probably will be very great for their semiconductor industry in the future. I encourage our government to help them to at least get some kind of internship here, some kind of experiences in our science park in Hsinchu. So yes, I think the U.S. tried to put eggs not in one basket, right? Just trying to make sure the semiconductor is not just only in Taiwan, that U.S. will have problem with the supply chain.
But it's a plus for both the Philippines and Taiwan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think in this trip, Blinken announced that the U.S. will invest $1 billion in the Philippines, especially in the testing and packaging industry of the Philippines, aiming at promoting Philippines' semiconductor production to 12% of its GDP. But the manufacturing basis will remain the same. And that investment was provided by the U.S. under its program of diversifying the semiconductor safety and under the Chip and the Science Act.
Now let's go back to the elephant in the room, the U.S. presidential election in November. Peter, it appears that we'll see another standoff between Trump and Biden. Who do you think will come out victorious come November?
I can tell you with almost unshakable confidence it will be Donald Trump.
Why is this? Is it because Americans are not happy with the status quo, they want change, or what do you think is motivating voters to vote for Donald Trump?
That is a phenomenal question. I think it's disgust with the neoliberal order. I think it's being extremely upset with the fringe identitarians on the left in the United States. I think it's failure to secure the southern border. I think it's inflation and the difficulty of ordinary people to live. I think it's the housing and fentanyl crisis, the homeless epidemic in the United States. I think it's basically a lack of trust or legitimacy crisis in our institutions, in our media, in our academies. People just don't trust the systems. They don't trust the judiciary. They don't trust the system. I think it's the perception of it. I could go on and on. I get no joy in a foreign country telling you this, but the United States has some very serious problems.
But given these serious problems, do you feel a Trump 2.0 would be worse than a Biden 2.0?
I don't care to wade in on that. From my perspective, it's utterly astonishing that these are the two best qualified people we have. I don't know a single person. I know some people who like Biden, very few, and I know some people who like Trump, but I really literally do not know a single person who thinks that this runoff is good for the country or it's good for the world. And it's an embarrassment to me to sit here and have to defend two people I think are, I mean, look, do you really think that either one of these guys could find Taiwan on a map? I don't.
Trump has been a vocal skeptic of NATO and commitments to other U.S. alliances. In the case that Trump wins the election, Raymond, do you feel we should be worried here in Taiwan?
We should be worried, but for what reason? That's key questions. I think, to be fair, that Trump initiated this whole strategy guiding the U.S. and the Western allies to a rivalry position or competitive position with China, and also identify China as the primary threats for the U.S. national security. And also, if you see the active actions taken by the U.S. administration on the Trump administration, and also the persons around him, the national security operators, you will see that their strategic forward-looking is very, very clear, in the sense that they will do something to protect U.S. interests in terms of, for example, trade. So the tariff will be a highlighted area, and also technology sanctioned export prohibition toward China, and also about the trying to get rid of Chinese political maneuver within the U.S. I think those will come back. And in terms of worrying concerns about the Trump's personal, especially because his business background, to the impulsive and trying to reach a deal, and maybe his rhetoric will be go ahead before what he really intended to. So it's really to distinguish the facade of Trump's rhetoric with the actions that the U.S. administration will do.
Peter, going back to Trump, he talked about actually going against the TikTok ban.
Right.
What do you say to that? Because skeptics of China would think that that's the right direction, whereas people who are seen as pro-China would be against that.
It's difficult because TikTok is clearly a Chinese mechanism to control. It has keystrokes, it logs those, it puts forward extraordinarily dangerous propaganda about being born in the wrong bodies and trans, and it forwards certain ideals that undermine or divisive to American society. It's a complicated question because I don't think that the people in general, but Americans in specifically in democracies, not very good at nuance. And so making a fine distinction or discerning judgment between TikTok and what was once Twitter but is now X and other social media platforms is difficult. But as a general rule, there's no question that TikTok is a divisive. And Jonathan Haidt, the sociologist from NYU, has just come out with a wonderful book about how social media is eroding young people's mental health, specifically young girls, and TikTok is at the fore for that.
So you agree that the ban should go in place?
It's tough to say. I don't know. I tend towards saying yes, but I haven't read the bill. You'd need to read the specifics of the legislation.
What about you, Professor Yin? What do you think will happen should Trump become president? Or do you feel that's not a possibility?
Oh, yeah, well, I think, if you look at the poll, look at the 7 swing states, he's ahead in every one. And the one was previously probably a little bit behind is Pennsylvania, but one of the newest poll is he's also 0.4 ahead. So if he won 3 out of this one, he will be winning the presidency. So he is in a better chance than 2020, okay, to win the presidency. But both he and Biden only can serve one more term, right? Even when he is elected, he's only going to serve one more term. So for me, if you understand understand Trump, someone who is a business people who like to make deal, who I think he will be using his next 4 years or his last 4 years to make deal that will benefit himself, his family, his own business, instead of the U.S. interest, it would be his personal interest. That's what worried me the most. So even if you look at this TikTok things, right? He said, well, if we ban TikTok, then Facebook will dominate because Facebook is not friendly to me. But I also think he wants to win some young people's vote. A lot of young people don't want to ban TikTok. So he's pretty smart here in saying that. But whatever he said and whatever he will do, I think will be two different things. So I don't trust him. Like he talked about this war, right? Really, he hasn't built that much, but he kept talking about the war. He said, well, this is going to be the most beautiful thing in the world. It will connect. But even if he didn't do that, the way he talked, people believe in him. So as a demagogue, I think this is what worries me the most.
One remarkable lesson is what Abe Shinzo, the then Prime Minister of Japan when Trump took office, Abe canceled all his appointments and go directly to Trump Tower in New York to try to meet Trump.
And that's what
which
Taiwan can do.
opens many, many doors for Japan. Right.
That's difficult, though. That's very difficult right now. But we do have some access to some of the conservative. If they were recruit into the next administration, if Trump won, they'll be part of the team, then yeah, there is opportunity. But our traditional, I would say, lobbying work about on those we call established politicians, no use. Trump doesn't like establishment.
Thank you very much, Professor Ian, Raymond, and Peter, for your time today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.